What is compromise? Let me ask this question. Can you give a definition of it? I got a definition. I actually made me some notes. I got a couple of pages of notes in here. I'm the world's worst about not paying attention to them, though. Compromise. Is that a good word? Is that a bad word? Okay. Actually, what you ask for is the current use. Strict definition, and that might not be the way we use it. Okay. I'll demonstrate that through these definitions. Usage. Compromise. Let me just kind of illustrate it as we make the definition. Well, let me go ahead and read the definition. I can't make up my mind, so I'm going to kind of compromise here. It's a middle state between conflicting opinions. Could that be something that happens in everyday life? Conflicting opinions. We all got an opinion, don't we? And in marriage, we got opinions. Or actions by mutual concession. Lots of concession goes on in our home, right? A lot of concession goes on in our lives and elsewhere. A settled dispute by mutual concession. A dispute. Okay. Cause to become vulnerable or function less effective. And it just gets a little bit deeper and deeper. Let me ask you, is there a good form of compromise, and is there a bad form of compromise? Is there? Is there? Compromise. Well, is it good or is it bad? We have to ask ourselves. The answer is, it depends, right? It depends. Let me kind of test the water here a little bit. As far as using the term or usage of it, let's talk about safety for a minute, okay? One of the things that I do at the hospital, I'm the environmental safety officer for the hospital. We have a lot of regs and rules and tons of standards and all this about safety. It's very expensive. We spend a lot of time doing this. Is safety a compromise? Let me illustrate that. Let's talk about a guy that climbs on the side of a building. He'll have a safety. Comfortable? You ever wore one? Okay. A life jacket. Are they comfortable? Ricky, you wearing a life jacket? Better compromise there. Okay. They're not get those real fine light or something like that. That's not comfortable. Compromise comfort for saving effort. We have to compromise money. Safety costs money. We have to buy all of that stuff, do we not? Okay. So as far as compromising safety, there is compromising safety. Now, let's look at that term in the reverse of that. Would you ever compromise the safety of your children or grandchildren? Would you compromise them? Would you compromise for safety? Would you compromise safety? Two totally different usages, right? Okay, so we'll look at that. And incidentally, looking in the Bible, can you tell me how many times, I know you don't know, or I didn't know, so I had to look it up this morning, how many times the word compromise is used in the King James Version of the Bible? I kind of had a real good idea about this, but I had to double check, okay? Fact check. Do we know? 0 times, okay? 0 times is the word compromise used in the King James Version of the Bible. Now, is the concept of being willing to compromise in certain matters, is it there? Is that concept there? Okay. Are there examples of those that compromise their safety there also? The marriage class in there. We talked kind of jokingly a little bit about compromise in marriage, right? There is a lot of compromise. You know, there has to be, or like I said, we wouldn't be here. I got it under control, though. 37 years. I mean, some of you have got that beat by a number of years. How do you figure it out? Well, it takes a lot of compromise. But, you know, I always have to put her on notice every now and then. Anyway, she says, yeah. Yeah, oh, yeah. Well, you know, I stay in that doghouse, that proverbial doghouse. Anyway, 37 years and counting. We're moving forward. I've got her trained. I got her trained every morning. I may have already told y'all this. Every morning she comes to me on her hands and knees. And she says, get out from underneath that bed, you coward, and go to work. No, just kidding. Compromise. Is there compromise in marriage? Absolutely. Would you be willing to compromise your marriage? Should you be willing to compromise your marriage? Absolutely not. We don't want to compromise our safety and compromise. Someone speak out. And we don't want to compromise our safety. We don't want to compromise our marriage. We don't want to compromise our. Can you about good examples of compromise? And I've also brought up some examples. We want to look at some examples, if time allows, of some bad examples of compromise in the Bible. Can you think of any? This is a class. Can you think of any? I want to take us to one. I can't remember if I've brought this before this audience before or here in this congregation or not. But I want us to take us to the book of Numbers. The book of Numbers. We're going to look at, the book of Exodus. Exodus. Numbers involves a poor example of compromise. We'll go there in just a moment. But let's look at a good example of compromise. And this has got to go, or my Bible, which is in pieces already, it needs help. This is a Dixon Bible. Are y'all familiar with the Dixon New Analytical Bibles? It's a study Bible I've used for years. Can you tell what kind of conditions it's in? They're out of print. They don't make them anymore. You can find them on the internet or whatever, and they're well over $100 a pop, used, even with writing in them in different various conditions. But I've always used a Dixon Study Bible. They're not really ideal for preaching because they have brackets. How many of you got a Dixon Bible or are familiar with the Dixon Bible? Anybody? Okay. Have you ever noticed those brackets that are in there? What those are other translations that are installed in the text as you read. So if you're trying to rush through a text, buddy, you're going to get tripped up because there's several brackets and many verses. Okay? Little side note there, it won't cost you anything. Compromise of your time, right? All right, let's look at an example of good compromise. Are y'all kind of quiet and sleepy this morning? Or did I wake you? All right, let's look at it in Exodus chapter 10. Exodus chapter 10. As you're going there, someone give me the story here. Y'all all know this. We have a group of Bible scholars in here. Give me the story here. Now that I've pointed out the text, give me the general story here. What's going on? Who are the main characters and what is the main event? Moses and Pharaoh. Okay. What's going on? What is happening here? God is working to do what? Free Israel from the Egyptian bondage, right? He's working toward that. We all know the story. We like to use it in Bible classes with our children in vacation Bible school about the plagues. Okay, it's good to review that from time to time. Go through all of that. Read through it at length last night. Won't have time to actually examine it at length last night. But what was happening here? God was telling Moses to go to Pharaoh and do what? What was he telling him to do? Hello? Well, let's look then. Let's go to Exodus chapter 10. And we will go to verse 9. We'll take a quick start there. And Moses says, we will go with our young men. Well, let's back up. Let's go back. Didn't really point out the verse here. I've got 7 through 9. And Pharaoh's servant said unto, how long shall this man make a snare unto thee? That's not what I'm looking for. Moses said in verse 8, and Aaron brought unto Pharaoh and said unto him, go, serve the Lord your God, but whom are they that shall go? I didn't get the right verse recorded here. Moses has made making numerous requests. We know the story. Let my people go. So they can do what? Go and worship the Lord out of the land, the cursed land, okay? Land. Go. God put the plague on them each time. So, and once again, Moses would go into Pharaoh and said, the Lord said, let my people go. Let my people go. On and on and on. Well, Pharaoh starts to give some concession after a period of not being able to hold out. Okay? Let me tell you, we've got some concessions that are needed right now in our country, do we not? Some concession was needed here. And what was the first concession that Pharaoh made after a number of the plagues had come and were taken away? What was one of the first concessions that Pharaoh gave? He told them what? He says, you can go, but don't go very far. Okay? Don't go very far. And he said, no. Matter of fact, he said, just kind of stay here close by. I'm thinking of paraphrasing there. And then Moses said, no, we've got to get out of the land of the Egyptians, because if they see what we do, they will persecute us. Because what they were going to do is they were going to sacrifice animals, were they not? Okay? And guess what those animals were to many of the Egyptians? What were they? I can hear whispers. They were gods. Okay? Well, he goes on to say, he says, okay, you can go. He says, the next time he gives a little bit more concession after being buffeted by God. He says, okay, you can go, but only the men can go. Okay? Only the men can go. I think I'm getting it right. And then what was the response to that? No. Yeah, only the adults can go, and you got to leave your kids behind. He says, no. Once again, I'm paraphrasing. Well, and after a period of time, he says, okay, here's what we can do. He says, look in verse 24 of Exodus chapter 10. And Pharaoh called unto Moses and said, go ye. They had enough of it. Here's the concession. Serve the Lord. Only let your flocks, your herds be stayed. Let your little ones also go with you. Okay, there's a concession. Should Moses have taken it then? You know, this has been trial after trial after trial, back and forth negotiations, failed negotiations. And finally, here's a chance right here. Okay, he says you can go. All of you can go. Go on. What did Moses do? Did Moses compromise at this point? Did he compromise? Read a verse. Did he compromise? Look in verse 25. And Moses said, thou must give us also sacrifices and burnt offerings. Let me stop right there and go back a little bit. Do you know that the disease of the cattle, the murrain, all of the Egyptian cattle was dead? Okay? So only the cattle that survived the plagues. What group of people were exempt from the plagues? The Israelites. They had cattle. But their oppressors, their masters who owned the people, inadvertently or subsequently, or whatever the best term for that is, owned their own cattle. They said, no, we're going to go. You got to give us our cattle. Let us take them. Okay? He goes on to say, and Moses said, thou must give us also sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice unto the Lord God. Now watch this. So he's asking this, okay? Now look at this first word right here. Our cattle also shall go with us. Remember he said that you and go, earlier he had said you can go, but leave your flocks. We don't want to die of starvation here. Your God has killed off all of our livestock and our crops. Remember the hail, the fiery hail had destroyed all of the crops and the barley and all that kind of stuff. The trees were even broken down, the groves, fruit trees and stuff. Everything was demolished. Egypt was in a pretty bad economic state at that point. And you've got this huge group of folks that have wealth now. This enslaved nation, Israel, this enslaved nation was wealthy now just in comparison to the possessions that the Egyptians owned. So now it was just not just a matter of Pharaoh's hardness of the heart. It was a matter of economic survival for Egypt, okay? Because there was a large host, a large number of Israelites, and they had lots of cattle, okay? And so it is that Pharaoh says, I'll compromise with you. I'll compromise with you. Right then would be a point that many of us may consider compromise. But did Moses compromise at this point? Not an inch. What does he go on to say? Look at the rest of the passage. Underline this. Our cattle shall go with us, and there shall, watch this. This is where it's underlined in my Bible. Not a hoof be left behind. We ain't leaving the first goat. You know, I'll take the cows and the horses and donkeys. You can have all them stinking goats. We'll take the sheep with us. No, he said not a hoof shall be left behind. For thereof we must take to serve our Lord, and we know what with we must serve the Lord until we come thither. Not a compromise. Zero compromise. What happened there? This is a negotiation that's taking place, right? That's what compromise is all about, right? Giving concession. Now, who's on the other side of the bargaining table? Whose turn is it now? It's Pharaoh's turn. How did he respond? Look at the next verse. Did he acquiesce? Did he agree? Did he concede? Nope. Nope. And what was the final straw that broke the camel's back? You're kind of quiet. Death of the firstborn, right? Finally, they were more or less forced or driven. He was fixing to have an internal rebellion based upon that. Imagine a nation's ruler when all of the firstborn of that nation are dying. Eventually, the people are going to rise up and overthrow the leader of that nation. Okay? Compromise. No room for compromise there. What are some of the areas in our life that we need to compromise? Change gears just a little bit. What are some of the areas that we need to compromise, where there is good compromise, or it is proper to compromise? We've alluded to and discussed and kind of fun that the first one that is our marriage, our home. Is there compromise in the home? Is there? Can you give me some examples without getting me in trouble? Getting yourself in trouble? Can you give me an example? Compromise. Where are you going to live? What you going to eat for supper? Right? Excuse me? Spending money. Is that a compromise in homes? I want to spend it on this and that, and my spouse may want to spend it on this and that or whatever. There might be more needs than what I want. What is the problem, or where is the problem when there's conflict and a lack of proper compromise in the family? Where does the culprit lay? In somebody said it. In selfishness. Me. in mind, right? Was Pharaoh being selfish at this point? Was his ego, his pride standing up in there? Selfishness. That's the what is it? The nemesis to proper compromise. Let's go on. He says, not a hoof, not a hoof. Business negotiations at work. Let's go to work now. Let's talk about work. Is there room for compromise at work in the business dealings? Bobby and others, and most all of us have bought homes, right? Bobby's in the business of selling homes. Can we be so hardcore and failing to compromise that we're going to be successful? Would you be successful, Bobby, if you did not compromise in real estate sales, in buying homes? That's where we negotiate, right? We give concessions. How does that go? Somebody says, I want this much for this house. We say, no, I'll give you this much, but you got to fix this or do this. There's negotiation, concessions that go back and forth. That's kind of what we do. Is that good? That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. Give me another example. That's in our business life and things like that. What about in politics? We briefly alluded to that. Is there a need for compromise in politics? Have you been listening to the news here lately? Hello? Are we awake? We need some compromise going on, do we not? Need some. Need some concessions being made. If not, just ask some of those people that ain't getting a check, okay? Ain't getting their due check. Anyway, compromise in politics. What about as far as individual preferences? Individual in our preferences versus something that is feasible. Okay? Let's just say that I've saved up some extra money and I want to go buy something. Most of you know I enjoy hunting, okay? And several in here also enjoy hunting, okay? And and let's say that I have worked real hard and saved real hard at extra money and worked extra to get extra money and done certain things and made an extra little pot of cash over here. And I want to go buy a new firearm. Let's just say that, okay? Now, is there going to be some compromise on my part there? Even though it's been compromised and agreed to and concessions were made that purchase may take place. But you know what? There's some very expensive, I'm just using this as an example, there's some very expensive firearms out there. Okay? And of course, if I had your money, I would buy whatever I wanted. But I have to make concessions between what I might want and what I can afford. Do I not? We have to make need. Trade one off. Sell one. Buy, sell, and trade. Whatever it takes. Okay. Concessions are made in our individual lives every day, and that's good concessions, right? Okay. Sometimes they might not turn out so well. It might be a poor decision on our part. But really neither right nor wrong morally, okay? Neither right nor wrong morally. So those are some examples of good concession. Now, let's talk about some bad examples of concession, okay? Not concession, but compromise. Let me ask you this. We say that compromise is good. Yes and no, correct? Let me ask you this. Would it be good for me to compromise my values? Would it be good for me to compromise my integrity? Wait a minute, compromise is a good thing? There's no compromise there. Remember talking about compromising for safety? You have to give up some comfort and cash, so to speak, to be safe. And you don't want to compromise your safety, but you want to compromise to attain safety. What about character? What about our personal character? Are we willing to compromise our personal character? Can you give me some examples? Would you be willing to launch out there and give me some examples of individuals or just not necessarily, don't want to talk about a specific person or anything, but those that may compromise their integrity, their values, their character, their purity. and their reputation. Can you think of any biblical characters? David is number one. Pristine character up to about one point in his life. Self-gratification, was it not? Solomon was one. Let's talk about David for a moment. Did he compromise his values? A man after God's own heart. What did he do? What did he do? He committed adultery, fornication, and then he committed murder to cover it up. Did he compromise? This is one of our hallowed biblical characters. Did he compromise his values? Did he compromise his integrity, his character, his purity, his reputation? Did it cost him? Did it cost him? It surely did. Number one, the child that was born as a result of that union died. Okay, and he was rebuked. Remember the story? He was rebuked. What else did it cost him? It cost him his family and his lives. Do you remember how that David's sons, they came to power? What did they do? They took his wives, went and built a tabernacle or a tent on top of the palace, and went in and raped his wives, forced his wives, and all for public, not the actual tent enclosed behind the scene, his wives. That was really something. All as a result of his compromise. David had a great yearning. What was it to do? What did he really want to do? He wanted to build the temple, did he not? A place of worship for God. But I think based upon his compromising, his integrity, his character, his spirituality, based upon that, God said, "Thou art what?" What did he call him? Remember the text? "Thou art a bloody man." They said no. God said no. Who built it? Solomon. There's another character. Very wise, full of wisdom. One that should understand how to make concessions, understand spirituality and needs and all that. Did he make concessions? How? Give me an example. By his foreign wives. Sexual gratification. Let me look at some other. Oh, here's one I want to discuss. In Numbers chapter 22. We know the story of Balaam. Well, who was Balaam? Who was Balaam? He was a prophet of God, okay, that was known to the king of Moab. And the Moabites were being threatened, or they felt threatened, by whom? God's people, Israel. And so the king came unto Balaam and said, "Here, I'll make you in good position if you'll curse the Israelites." They knew that he had power. And what did he say? I cannot do that. He knew what the law was, or what could be done, what could not be done. But did the king give up on that? The king of Moab, did he give up on that? He sent more highly recommended or higher officials with greater promises of gifts. And what did Balaam do? Did he say, "Listen, I already told you one time, get out of here. Okay, it's over with. That's been settled." What did he do? He says, "Let me go in and double check and ask God again. Let's rethink this." Okay? Well, we know the rest of the story. God said, "Go." God already told him, "Don't go with them and don't curse the people." And but Balaam, he saw that money. And when we go to 2 Peter, how does it describe Balaam? Balaam is used as an example of how not to be, one given to covetousness. Okay? He compromised his values. He compromised his integrity, his reputation. He was a prophet of God. But he compromised all of that for what? Gold and silver. Gold and silver. Balaam did. What about Achan? I wish we had time to go and just read the text on that. What about Achan? What was the problem with Achan? We know who Achan is? Israel was going in and take the promised land. First sight was Ai. Okay, they were going to go in there. They were to destroy it. And everything was to burn. It was devoted to God. They were not to take anything with them. That is Israel. They were not to use any of the riches for their own. The first conquer was to go to God. The first fruits of the invasion, I guess you would say, of God's people into the promised land, all of the spoils went to God. They were devoted to God. What happened? Achan. And he said, if we go back to the text, Achan stole gold and silver and clothing, right? Buried them in his temple. And after that, God got real angry, and Israel was defeated because there was sin in the camp. The sin was found out. Achan and his family and their livestock was destroyed as a result of that. Okay? But when you read Achan's confession, what did he say? He said, I coveted. So what are the enemies to proper concession, or what are the enemies of true and right compromise? What are the enemies? It's selfishness, covetousness, fulfillment of self-gratification, all of those things. Those are the enemies to the good kind of compromise that we need. What about congregationally? As a preacher and in my personal beliefs, can I ever compromise the truth? Bible doctrines about the church, Bible doctrines about the church government, Bible doctrines about the church's acts of worship. Can there be any compromise there? Zero. Zero area for compromise. It makes it difficult. Not a hoof, not a song, not an act, not a pastor, not one iota of compromise in those areas. We'll have to quit. We're well over our time. Thank you.